All right. He's super tall. That's why, move it. All right, everybody, and welcome to the second paper in our Best Paper Session number 2 session. And again, I think quite a few folks are staying from the last one and probably been in paper sessions, but just please silence your cell phones. And if you're going to leave the room, please do so through the back door that you came in, and just be sure the doors don't slam and all that fun stuff. And then also no video photography or flash photography. You're allowed to snap a photo if you'd like. That's great, but make sure the flash is off when you do so. So. Our second presentation of the session is from our Emerging Concepts and Innovative Technologies, or ECIT subcommittee, and the name of this one is, I'm still, got all discombobulated, sorry about that. The name of this one is Trustchain, Doubt is the Origin of Wisdom, and our presenter, Mr. Connor Baugh, is a data scientist at Intuitive, working on the data science and artificial intelligence solutions team. He's responsible for leveraging established data science techniques and developing novel algorithms to address unique challenges encountered across government and industry. He received his MS in data science from the University of West Florida and his BS in economics from Florida State University. All right, please join me in welcoming Connor.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me all right? We good? A little higher? How's that? All right. Great. So in this talk, in this presentation, I'm going to be talking a lot about trust in large language models, why that's important, and how we can actually quantify the trustworthiness of LLM-generated responses in the presence of uncertainty about the ground truth, or in the presence of compromised models. Then, to understand what I mean by the term trust chain, I'll be briefly covering blockchain consensus mechanisms and how those allow us to operate in uncertain environments, and how we can translate that into LLM consensus for LLM-generated response validation using classical statistical methods. For those of you who are familiar with statistics, please forgive me. We're going to be going very high level here. If you have any technical questions, feel free to ask during the questions portion, or I'll be outside after the session's finished. Afterwards, I'll walk us through our experimental approach and present the results of our experiments, and then conclude with some concluding remarks. All right, so since the advent of the transformer architecture in 2017 and the introduction of language models like ChatGPT a few years later, there's been a growing demand for LLM-powered solutions and workflows. And this is easy to understand. Because they've been proven to work for many different everyday tasks that we deal with, they allow us to work more efficiently when we integrate them. So that gives us the ability to automate tasks that are time-consuming, like document summarization or code generation. However, we typically expect these LLM workflows to work every time flawlessly, and when they don't provide us with accurate information, that leads us to run the risk of getting burned. So just significant risk there. So we shouldn't be blindly trusting the outputs of our models. Really, we should have a healthy dose of skepticism for anything that these models output. So the two primary threats to LLM trustworthiness are hallucinations and poisoning attacks. So hallucinations are where the model generates inaccurate or fabricated information, and this is largely due to their reliance on statistical pattern matching. You may be familiar with the example on the right here, where the model can't identify that there are more than 2 R's in strawberry. So we get plausible feedback from them, even if they're, but it's ultimately false. And so when the model is uncertain about some question that you're asking, it's uncertain about how to answer that, rather than just telling you that it doesn't know, it's just going to make up whatever's the most likely. So there's risk associated with that. Now, on the other hand, poisoning attacks, this is the intentional corruption of model parameters or training data. And even with just a handful of contaminated samples, they can lead to substantial harm, like the unauthorized leaking of content. So there are several mitigation strategies in the literature. These are usually things like specialized detection mechanisms or decoding strategies to increase reliability. But they ultimately rely on things like discrete labels, so true or false answers or multiple choice answers, or they're susceptible to misalignment. So that just means that they don't necessarily align with what a human would value as trustworthy versus untrustworthy information. So an example of where these mitigation strategies might fail is with a query like this. So given the query to an LLM, how might emerging technologies change strategic deterrence concepts over the next decade? That is obviously a very open-ended question, and no one really knows the answer to that. So we might expect two different answers from two LLMs. So LLM A may tell us that they'll enable the US to perfectly predict all adversarial actions and thus eliminate all risk of conflict. Whereas LLM B might tell us that they'll likely reshape strategic deterrence, but ultimately require adaptive multi-domain strategies. So just looking at these two, we as humans can understand which one may be more trustworthy, which one we believe more, whereas the other we may take with more of a grain of salt. So LLM A is clearly giving us unrealistic or exaggerated claims, and LLM B is giving us a much more nuanced perspective, and it does acknowledge the strategic complexity and uncertainty revolving around these technologies. So obviously we can tell the difference, so how do we quantify that? How can we quantitatively assess the trustworthiness when the ground truth is unknown? And how can we make sure that this method is robust to poisoning attacks and hallucinations? So one way that this type of validation has worked in practice is through something called blockchain consensus mechanisms. For those unfamiliar with blockchain, it is the foundation on which cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are built, and they're just decentralized networks of computers that are just following a common protocol to validate and record transactions. Most importantly, however, they are transparent and they're robust to fraud. There is no central authority associated with them. Typically, these consensus mechanisms are validating pending transactions through things like complex math puzzle solving. Here we have a very simple example on the bottom. So basically, when the first computer comes through and tries to validate or submits a solution to attempt to validate a transaction, it then submits that solution to the rest of the network, and the other computers will be easily able to verify if that is correct or not. And if it's correct, then they will approve it and add it to the chain. So in the same vein, taking inspiration from that, we are defining a Trustchain network as a decentralized network of LLMs. And that is meant to be used to validate and return trustworthy responses under uncertainty about the ground truth. This is ultimately comparing the semantic intent of these open-ended responses in the LLM's embedding spaces. And it's designed to be robust to poisoning attacks and hallucinations. So the actual consensus mechanism relies very heavily on advanced statistical methods, which we're not going to get into on the slides. But intuitively, it can be understood as evaluating the semantic overlap of response distributions generated by different LLMs. So effectively, each LLM produces some number of responses, and then all the other LLM's responses are fed into each of the other LLMs, and their overlap in that semantic embedding space is compared. So the greater the overlap, the greater the evidence of trustworthiness. And once those are evaluated and combined, we can return our most trustworthy response. So here we have a process diagram for how this consensus mechanism operates. So starting with the query up top, that is fed into our Trustchain network of, here we have 3 LLMs, and each of those LLMs generate n responses. Each of those responses are then fed into the rest of the LLMs, and the semantic overlap is evaluated using our equivalence test. Once the LLMs return the evidence in favor of the other's trustworthiness, the LLM-specific evidence is then combined, and each of the LLM's trustworthiness, for lack of a better term, scores are compared, and we return a response for the most trusted LLM. Okay, so for our experimental approach, we used 4 small local LLM models, as you can see in the table on the bottom left. So we have 3 models that are roughly 14 billion parameters, and the NVIDIA model, the fourth, with only 8 billion parameter models, or 8 billion parameters. So the primary questions that we want to answer here are how much semantic overlap actually indicates trustworthiness. And to do that, we'll be estimating some statistics, and we'll be using the Truthful QA benchmark to do so. The second question that we want to answer is, can we expect the same level of overlap for all LLMs? This is important for if you just want to plug and play, or if you need to tailor individual statistics to each of the LLMs in the network. So we'll be comparing those estimated statistics from question 1. Thirdly, how many responses do we need to generate per LLM? This is very important, obviously, for computational resource and expense-wise. So to do that, we'll be conducting a statistical power analysis based on the results from 1 and 2. Lastly, how robust is Trustchain to poisoning and hallucinations? To do this, we'll be conducting we did conduct a sensitivity analysis over an increasing number of compromised LLMs. Okay, so just a quick overview of the Truthful QA dataset. This dataset is designed to assess the ability of LLMs to distinguish factual information from misunderstandings or false beliefs. The full dataset comprises 38 categories, but for our purposes, we distilled that down to 3 categories: misconceptions, distractions, and logical falsehoods. And here in the table, we have some examples of what type of questions we have with that, and our truthful and hallucinated responses pairs. Okay, so we have a lot of data here. It's a little overwhelming, but we'll focus primarily on the effect size columns underneath each of these models. So we have the effect size broken out by misconceptions, distractions, and logical falsehoods, and we have an overall score for each, or an overall estimate for each. So what this effect size effectively is this is how we are quantifying the semantic overlap between truthful and hallucinated responses within these LLM hidden embedding spaces. So for reference, a effect size of 0.5 indicates perfect semantic overlap. So there is no differentiation between truthful and hallucinated responses. And an effect size of 1 would indicate no overlap whatsoever, so they are perfectly distinct from one another. As you can see, because we're working with such small models, the effect sizes are pretty close to 0.5. So there's significant overlap between the truthful and hallucinated responses, at least within the smaller models' embedding spaces. Notably, if you pay attention to the highlighted section here under the NVIDIA 8 billion parameter model, you can see that its effect size is significantly smaller, or at least notably smaller than the 14 billion parameter models. And this leads us to believe that there is some effect size scaling at play. So the larger the model is, the more semantic nuance it can encode. And that's at least somewhat intuitive for anyone who's played around with these larger models or much smaller distilled models. You can definitely tell a difference. So this leads us to believe that, that we should expect much larger effect sizes if we were working with much larger models in practice. And this is going to be important for a few slides later when we're talking about sample sizes. All right, so to determine whether we can use the same effect size for the entire network, or if we need to tailor each effect size to the individual LLMs in the network, we conduct something called a TQ test. And this is just a meta-analytic technique used to compare effect sizes from between studies. And so what we find here, if you just focus on the p-value columns, starting from the left, we ran a Q-test on all of the models, so all 4 of them. And we found that there was statistically significant heterogeneity in these effect sizes. And that just means that, no, you can't plug and play. They're substantially different. To control for the fact that the 8 billion parameter model had a much smaller effect size, we compared just the 14 billion parameter models, seeing if the like size models played nicer. And we still found that there is statistically significant heterogeneity in the effect sizes. So ultimately, at least for these smaller models, and given the Truthful QA benchmark, there's no real ability to plug and play. So if you wanted to use this in practice, you would have to tailor your test toward each of the individual LLMs. Okay, so to talk about our results from the power analysis, I need to explain something called statistical power, which is our y-axis here on the chart. So statistical power is just our true positive rate for our statistical test. And that just means that if you have an LLM-generated response that is trustworthy, you want your consensus mechanism to identify that it's trustworthy some percent of the time. Typically, practitioners set this to something like 80%, but this is just a hyperparameter, so you can tailor this to whatever your needs might be. And this directly, so effectively, once you have determined what that desired statistical power is, then you try and match your sample sizes accordingly so that you can reach that reliably and consistently. So as you can see here, each of these lines indicates a different trust chain network with a differing number of LLMs contained within it. And what we find is that the sample size per LLM required to reach an 80% statistical power is really anywhere between 1,400 LLM-generated responses and 1,800, which obviously is not practical in the least. However, again, these limitations stem from the fact that we have such small effect sizes. If we were using much larger models, then this would likely reduce substantially, and this would be much more practical for real-time evaluation. Now for the sensitivity analysis, this is just showing us how sensitive our models are toward the additions of compromised LLMs in the network. So we start out with that 80% statistical power, and we incrementally add one compromised LLM to these networks. And what we see here is that it is fairly sensitive to these, which is not great. However, as you can see, we have this marginal decreasing curve as the number of compromised LLMs increases. And what this tells us is that there's an optimal point of robustness that we can achieve. So all this means is that if anyone's familiar with like an elbow test with k-means clustering, congrats, I guess. But that ultimately what this tells us is that for, at least for the graph here, we can say, okay, maybe 2 to 3 compromised LLMs is optimal, so you can just increase the sample size accordingly so that that matches your 80% or whatever statistical power. And then for any additional compromised LLM added after that, your statistical power drops much less significantly, so it's still reliable in the long run. Okay, so to conclude, the key points that I really want you to take away from here are that it is possible to evaluate the trustworthiness of LLM-generated responses, even in the absence of some ground truth. You can work with open-ended responses and be able to have some idea of how trustworthy your LLMs are being. And even though some of these results were, at face value lackluster due to the computational constraints and due to the poor statistical power because of that, our findings have shown us that expanding this toward larger LLMs and something that I haven't discussed in this presentation of optimizing our statistical approaches, this will likely be much more valuable and practical for real-time evaluation in the future. So that brings me to future work. In the future, we plan to work on integrating this with much larger LLMs, and we plan to optimize our statistical procedures accordingly so that we can hopefully reduce some computational costs. All right, thank you very much. Any questions? Yes?
So you designed a framework and you tested it on statistical significance and across everything. Did you compare it against any other like consensus algorithms, like classical consensus algorithms?
I did not, and that's just because it's hard to compare. And so like when I was talking about the consensus algorithms for like blockchain, those are very different. That's not really statistical, and that's not really a statistical manner. And yeah, just we didn't get to that. All right, anybody else?
Did you find any like cons or deficiencies in using this approach in validating those LLMs?
We did not get that far into it. Probably future work will be looking more into that. I do know that we found some cons with some of the statistical procedures. So like the combination test, which we didn't really cover, is it's optimized for the way that the embedding structures work, but it's not optimized toward the way that LLM embedding structures work. So likely, there are definitely cons with what we used. So future work, we'd be looking into how we could better optimize for that, if that answers your question.
Do you have any, I guess, hypotheses
in general. I mean, yes to the latter, for sure. The biggest hurdle that I can imagine is that because we've shown that these very small models don't work in practice for what we're trying to achieve, you'd have to be working with much larger models, which are much harder to host locally. So for any information-sensitive type of ordeal, you have to have some serious firepower to store all of these. And if you want a network with, let's say, 15 of these large models, that you're really asking for a lot. So we'll be working on how we can drop that computational cost a little bit. Yeah.
So I was wondering if for the compromised LLM, you always use one of the 14, or you may have also used the 8 billion parameter, and if you did, was there a difference between the effect of like that smaller model with the compromised?
Yeah. So for the power or the sensitivity analysis, where we're adding those compromisations, what we're really doing is a simulation. So we're taking those effect sizes, or really the confidence intervals around them, for these equivalence tests. And as I showed up here, how they have statistically significantly, or they're just different effect sizes. And because we found that we couldn't use the same ones for each one, I just took the lowest effect size, or the smallest effect size of interest for the Cogito 14 billion parameter model, and we ran our analysis on that. So there wasn't a comparison between like the 14 versus the 8 or anything like that. It was just using that effect size, simulating data accordingly, and then seeing what our results came out as. Yeah.
So one of the concerns is that with more and more web content being AI generated, that it's going to effectively cause model collapse as it's a source of training for future iterations. Do you see your framework holding up against that robustly in your approach, or how would you address it?
That is a great question, and that's certainly an issue. Effectively, so to hedge against that as much as possible, you would want to use fundamentally different models. So you'd want to use like a Microsoft versus a OpenAI, or whichever local models that you can actually have access to, but fundamentally trained on different training data, so that, again, you can hopefully hedge for that. However, that is a very real problem that we're going to have to deal with eventually. So yes, if all of your models in your network are trained on synthetic data that you can't necessarily trust, you're going to have problems with that. And that's just where you're going to have quality assurance people going in and just making sure that it aligns at least somewhat with reality. All right. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, my notes just decided to close on me, so this is a good time. Sorry. But wow, what a great group. You guys really quieted up when I so again, my name is Tara Kilcullen-Oliva. I am your session chair for this afternoon. And as I'm sure many of you have attended many sessions today, please silence your cell phones so that we don't distract our presenter. Again, it's a 20-minute presentation with 5 minutes Q&A. And also no flash photography or video. You can take photos if you'd like, but please make sure your flash is off. And now my technology at its best, right? So I want to say again, welcome to our third session of our best paper, session number 2, and this is our final best paper presentation. So it's from our Policy Standards Management and Acquisitions Subcommittee, or PSMA, and the title is Utilizing Lessons from Foreign UAS Threats to Inform Domestic Counter-UAS. Our presenter, Mr. Bryce Ott, is a project director within the Capabilities Program Executive for Simulation Training and Instrumentation, Threat Systems Management Office, or TSMO. His professional experience includes a proven track record of Department of Defense acquisition and systems engineering of military modeling and simulation and training systems. In his career, he was the leading director in the standing up of the U.S. Army's current threat SUAS training program. His focus includes technology modernization, testing and training UAS capabilities, live threat, wireless technologies, and networking infrastructure. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Mr. Brysott.
Gonna have to give me a box or something here. All right. Perfect. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thanks everybody for being here. Good evening. As she mentioned, my name is Brysott, and I am currently the Senior Project Director within the Threat Systems Management Office for our SUAS portfolio. TSMO falls under the PEO STRI of Simulation, Training, and Instrumentation, soon to be renamed here. But what I want to talk to you guys today about is an issue that I believe is no longer theoretical, it is no longer abstract, but it is a clear and present danger that we face here on the homeland, which is the domestic UAS threat. But more importantly, I want to make sure that we are leveraging all of the lessons learned that we see on the battlefield to better inform our domestic counter-UAS and prepare for that threat here at home. So here's today's agenda. We'll start with an overview of the problem. We will examine both the foreign and domestic UAS environments. I want to discuss the policy and training challenges that we're seeing in our state, tribal, local, territorial law offices, how we can make that a little bit better, and conclude with some recommendations on policy reform, improved testing and training, and better all coordination between organizations. So, as an introduction, in the last decade, unmanned aircraft systems, or what most of us just call drones, have transformed warfare. They've crept across the battlefield, and now they're starting to creep steadily into our domestic environment. Our borders, our airports, our stadiums, and even over our critical military installations. My goal for this presentation is pretty simple, to share how what we've learned abroad in places like Ukraine, the Middle East, Israel, how we should directly inform what we do to test, train, and prepare against those threats with what we're seeing overseas. I also want to highlight, and this is a bit scary for a lot of people to hear, I want to highlight the deficiencies that we have in our policy, in our coordination, and our authority that lead to exploitable vulnerabilities in our domestic counter-UAS strategy. So, starting with the foreign landscape, we are seeing a ton of clear signs of how UAS are transforming the battle space. So, I think a lot of people are familiar with what happened in Ukraine. So, in June of this year, Ukrainian forces launched what a lot of people are calling Operation Spiderweb. That consisted of 117 small drones, which were mostly built with commercially available parts, and they attacked strategic Russian air bases. The result of that attack was more than 40 aircraft destroyed, and what the Chief of Staff of the Army actually recently talked about on CBS's Face the Nation about 2 weeks ago, there was anywhere between $7 to $10 billion worth of damage and vast swaths of the Russian cruise missile bomber fleet that were disabled. Think about that for a minute. $100 to $1,000 drones taking out billions of dollars worth of capability. But that's not really the unprecedented part about that attack. We've all seen the videos online of drones taking out tanks, and we all understand the math behind cheap drone takes out expensive target. What was really eye-opening about that event was how commercial equipment was used to swarm. They were smuggled deep into enemy territory, and they were able to evade all of the air defenses that were at those locations. That is a playbook for how that type of effort could take place anywhere, including the United States, and that is the unprecedented part. In the Middle East, we've seen non-state actors with very minimal resources sidestep our billion-dollar air defense systems. So there was the 2019 attack on the Saudi oil fields. There was also a 2024 strike in Jordan that killed 3 American soldiers. And that just goes to show that drones in and of themselves can be extremely lethal, so we need to take them very seriously. In Israel, October 7th, 2023, drones demonstrated that simply by dropping explosives, you could blind sophisticated systems just long enough for a coordinated attack. The drones themselves don't even have to be the main threat of the attack. They just have to distract or disrupt what you are using for your defenses, so what comes behind them can hit you even harder. And that's definitely something to be worried about. China is also obviously a very big player in this space. So we see China both with military innovation and industrial influence. So DJI drones are routinely found on the battle space, whether they were provided directly by China or purchased via third parties. And the thing to take away is that all of these events are not outliers. They're part of a pattern that drones are cheap, they're fast evolving, they're hard to detect, and they can overwhelm traditional defenses. Each of these cases should be able to provide actionable insights from, say, swarm flight to low visibility incursions. The threat is evolving a lot faster than our defenses can keep up, especially here at home. So we must extract as much information from these cases as we can, analyze them, and apply these battlefield lessons to our defense posture. We also need to make sure, and this is what I want to highlight very much importantly towards the end of this, that we need to utilize the capabilities at our nation's disposal that we use within a military context to strengthen our domestic readiness. So we do a lot of work in the DoD to test and train against UAS, and that's what I do for my job every day. That needs to translate into testing and training for Counter-UAS domestically. We need to share that information and that capability. What we've learned abroad is sobering but clarifying. These tactics can and will be tried against domestic U.S. targets. So on the domestic front, we're already seeing the warning signs. These are not hypothetical situations. These are things that are happening right now. So in January of this year, over the AFC wildcard game, the NFL game, a drone breached restricted airspace. The FBI, we frequently meet with them at TSMO, the FBI admitted that despite active surveillance and clear FAA flight restrictions, the response teams had neither the authority nor the proper equipment in time to counter that drone. The game was paused and the drone eventually flew away. If that was more than just someone being clueless and careless and they had intent, they would have had a successful strike at that game. Airports are an even scarier scenario where collisions with drones midair could be a serious problem. This year alone, before this presentation was due in October, there was already over 1,300 incursions at airports across the nation just this year. At Pittsburgh International, one single drone caused a ground stop for half an hour. It caused flight delays across multiple airports that they service and caused, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of losses for airlines. The local TSA agents had no authority at those locations to respond to the threat. At Wright-Patt, drones have been spotted conducting what looks very much like reconnaissance. So they're loitering deliberately near sensitive infrastructure, and the base personnel there and the commanders there have not been given the authority due to legal restrictions to engage. And public reporting from the FBI confirms that to this day, no one has been able to identify who operated those UAS over Wright-Patt. What all of these incidents have together is, in common specifically, is legal ambiguity, fragmented authority, and inconsistent response standards. There's also a lack of accurate test and training for all of these groups to practice for these events before the threat emerges. So the threat is moving way faster than our policies can keep up. Despite the growing threat, U.S. defenses remain really fragmented. Our federal law enforcement components, only a few federal law enforcement components in the Departments of Homeland Security, Defense, and Justice have the explicit legal authority to mitigate illicit drone activities. Other entities, including state and local police departments, and more importantly, the TSA, lack the authority to do so themselves and must rely on federal support or remain powerless while drones fly over their critical infrastructure or other installations. So by their own admission, the DOJ and DHS can only be present or help respond to less than 1% of the Counter-UAS drone operational requests that they receive each year. So when that federal agent that has the authority to say shoot it down needs to be there, the DOJ and DHS simply cannot support all of the requests that we're getting. Agencies like TSA and state and local law firms and even private operators of critical infrastructure are often legally barred from taking active counter-UAS measures. They have detection systems in place. They know the drones are there. They can tell they're flying over their airspace. But the person who spots the drone rarely is a person who has the authority to take it down. And the delays in that communication will be lethal. In a July testimony to the House Homeland Security Committee, the president and CEO of AUVSI was asked, if a drone were to incur into an airport, would that airport have the authority to deal with it, even if they know that it poses an unbelievable risk to their passengers? And his response was clear, no. So, you know, hopefully we can all continue to sleep at night and take flights, but we can definitely improve. So there have been some mitigations that have been put in place. Many of you may have heard of remote ID, and that is a step forward, but it still leaves major gaps. So there are some exceptions. If your drone is small enough, under a certain weight, you don't have to have it. Remote ID can pretty easily be spoofed, and really all that remote ID does is give you awareness. It does not give you authority to engage. And the last thing I want to highlight is there's definitely disparity in what types of testing and training capabilities that agencies have. So while some agencies benefit from advanced training and gear, some other agencies, like way down at the local level, they're really lacking that gear and training. So there's a big disparity, especially when it just comes to communicating and coordinating protecting events between the local level and your federal level. So what I want to highlight is we're not lacking a technological prowess. I don't want to come across like that. We have detection systems, we have jamming tools, we have the people, but what we lack is authority, coordination, and the practice to use it effectively. So the actual policy at question here. So under U.S. Code subsection 124N, only a handful of federal agencies are actually allowed to take kinetic or electronic action against drones, even when a drone poses an immediate threat. Local officials will be forced to stand down unless that federal agent is present. To complicate things further, and this is one that's really important, especially like with the example of Right Pat. If a UAS crosses from public airspace into military restricted airspace, jurisdiction becomes very murky. One agency may detect it, and the other may have the authority to take it down, but in the handoff, valuable time is lost, and by the time that handoff is made, usually the drone is done with its mission. And more importantly, agencies may be legally barred from sharing the information of the monitoring systems they do have on the UAS activities that took place outside of their airspace. We obviously want to protect. We don't want Timmy, who lives outside of JMRC, to get his Christmas drone taken out of the sky just because he lives close to the base. So we got to protect those civil liberties, but we definitely need to enhance that with more communication. What we end up with is a patchwork system where local police, federal agencies, and infrastructure owners all have partial responsibility, but no unified doctrine. And adversaries, whether they're state actors, cartels, or lone individuals, they're taking note of the problems that we have in this coordination, and they're going to exploit it. Our adversaries understand these constraints and can and will exploit them. To keep peace, we need clear, updated laws that protect both national security and individual rights without sacrificing response speed. So this is Bryce's opinion on what we should do. To overcome fragmented efforts, we need a standardized, deeply integrated interagency collaboration. That'll start with a shared threat intel formed playbook with common rules of engagement that everybody can agree on across federal, state, and local agencies. We need to eliminate this confusion caused by conflicting definitions and conflicting rules across these different agencies. We also need to spearhead joint training exercises. Those are so critical. Agencies that do not train together cannot fight together. So what we can do is we can leverage LVC-based exercises and red team simulations like those used in the military environment to uncover weaknesses that static training that maybe your local officers are sitting in front of a PowerPoint and learning about UAS, they're just not getting that they could get from some LVC-based training and exercises. We also need to ensure that any training and exercises that we do not respect jurisdictional boundaries. If we're gonna fly a red team, or we're gonna do red teaming, they absolutely need to cross boundaries so these agencies are forced to communicate and work together. I would spearhead standing up regional test ranges, places with live fire capabilities, red team drills, and realistic scenarios that can be run jointly. And current counter-UAS testing facilities, such as White Sands and Yuma, if possible and as they have range time available, which I know is sometimes scarce, they should open their doors to bring in partners for counter-UAS testing. We also need to establish a National Counter-UAS Coordination Center modeled after the National Counterterrorism Center, where the DHS, DOD, DOJ, and DOT can all come together to share their intel from their respective domains. That data has to flow both ways, so it needs to go from military to domestic and from domestic to military. So the lessons that we learn from domestic encounters can inform our national defense strategies, and insights from foreign threats can be injected into civilian preparedness. We can't afford to train in isolation, both either domestically or in the foreign fight. And finally, we need a real-time intelligence fusion system. So we need to aggregate all of our drone threat data across federal, state, and local levels and allow proactive responses to patterns that we see in UAS. So as we're starting to see swarms, as we're starting to see espionage missions, as we're starting to see coordinated disruptions, we can all have that information in one place and all get better together, so that when a drone is spotted over a refinery in Texas, we can take that knowledge and inform our counter-UAS operators at a football stadium in New York. So, my suggestion on the policy changes. We absolutely need to update 6 U.S. Code, subsection 124N. We have to add the TSA as an action, as an organization that can take action imminently without having to wait for other federal agents to be present. So I believe that there is a 3-tiered operational authority that we can implement to better counter UAS here at home. So that'll start with your core federal actors, the ones who already have the ability to take down drones now, but add the TSA. We'll also have qualified state, local, and tribal territorial organizations. So these would be organizations that have predefined zones on where they can provide counter-UAS, and they also have to pass training that is designed and developed by DHS and DOJ. So they meet the same qualifications, but they just have limited zones of authority that they can operate in, but they still have the authority to engage when it's within their zones. And last, we still will need to have infrastructure operators with sense-only capabilities. That's just going to always be the case, because we can't have cops with counter-UAS or just your local power station being able to shoot down drones willy-nilly, because we will start to infringe on some civil liberties in that case. So this is how I propose that it needs to be done. It needs to be governed and have oversight from DHS and DOJ to ensure rigorous oversight. And we need to allow more agencies to take direct action against UAS. All right, this is a slide that I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit too much, but hopefully I can get past it, because I'm running a little low on time. So I believe that the Department of Defense has a very critical role to play in this field. So we have decades of experience in running live virtual and constructive simulations. We've built models that have drone swarms, that have GPS denial, that have electronic warfare, and that can all be safely and cost-effectively be repeated. So these same tools need to be shared with our state, local, tribal, territorial agencies so that they can practice with these advanced tools and can do it cost-effectively, which is very difficult for some of these local law enforcement agencies. It's also critical that we embed these scenarios into national exercises. Just like we have cyber and terrorism injects, drone threats need to be a standard part of these exercises, and that's how we'll normalize response, we'll close those seams that I talked about, and we'll build true readiness. And here's where I'll get in my soapbox. We absolutely must ensure threat-faithful targets for counter-UAS testing that keep pace with UAS technologies that proliferate from nation-states to online clout chasers. I still cannot emphasize this enough. Gone are the days where every drone you see in the sky is a DJI. Gone are the days where every drone in the sky uses one of a handful of protocols that your counter-UAS system has a library for. Gone are the days where you can expect 3 or 4 different frequencies that they're on. Gone are the days where you can expect that every drone's going to have a certain dependency, like GPS. We cannot count on counter-UAS systems in a single capacity without layered defense that rely on some of these legacy and looking in the rearview mirror type UAS technologies. We have to have threat-validated UAS systems for red teaming. Current domestic counter-UAS technologies, and this has been demonstrated at a recent DHS event where we were looking at how we're going to be protecting the World Cup and the Olympics as they come to the United States. They cannot effectively counter a novice with an afternoon, an AI chatbot, and a few $100s, and what they can do with a drone. It just can't happen. And that's how I know, is because we recently did it with a DHS event. Conclusion. I'm about to get shooed. Okay, I'll just jump straight down to the end. Every drone incident at an airport, at a stadium, or a border crossing is a warning shot. Each one tells us that the seams in our current approach are visible, exploitable, and dangerous. The adversaries we face, whether foreign militaries, criminal networks, or lone actors, are acting quickly. We cannot afford to be reactive. We must take the lessons written in blood overseas and apply them here at home now while we still have time. If we do, we can build a cohesive, agile, and effective domestic counter-UAS posture. And if we don't, the first successful drone attack will teach that lesson for us, and it will be far more costly. Thank you. Before we get to questions, just so you know, if any question could potentially be cooey or classified in my response, which is very likely with this topic, even doing this brief was quite difficult with those restraints, you can scan this code and get my information, and we can chat at a later time, or my email is also up on the screen.
Looks like you just scared everybody.
Yeah.
Taking the Russian attack, or Ukrainian attack on Russia and their bombers, I'm trying not to go classified.
Yep.
Have you recommended anything as, I'm looking at a military side, going hardened, kind of like we see overseas? Because I look at a zero-day attack where there was no incursion before. There's a house and it's filled with these. Have you recommended, or anybody recommending?
Well, absolutely. In fact, there was, recently has been stood up the JIATF, which I think is a very good first step as far as military installations are concerned. I don't believe that translates into things like airports and stadiums and stuff like that, because it is very military focused. Yeah.
But now with this, I consider based on that,
Mhm.
a soft target.
Yeah. So my recommendation always to people who ask me that question is the obvious one, first of which is layered defense. You have to have multiple counter-UAS systems available. You have to have them all in sync. And you have to make sure that you have practiced and done your testing and training beforehand to make sure that you can counter those threats. And then the last thing I always like to tell people is you will always be more successful at countering a UAS left of launch. So as soon as if it's in the air, you're likely too late. Now, we obviously still have to have counter-UAS systems to deal with the ones that make it to the air, but you will always be more effective at stopping the launch of that UAS than trying to stop it afterwards. And that's where the FBI comes into play, where we're talking intel. Yes, sir.
Your slide 12, I don't see that guy sitting out there watching on Thanksgiving Day,
Yep,
type stuff.
absolutely. Right there. Oh, we got one more back there, I think. Oh, is that time? It was time, but. Okay, sorry. One more. Last one.
Yeah, real quick question. So you were talking about giving authority to TSA, for example,
Yes.
for countering UAS systems that are unauthorized.
Yes.
So one of the big things that always come up when it comes to defense is resource allocation,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I don't know if you already addressed this, but in terms of addressing that as a justification or for kind of a workaround with resource allocation, how would you address that?
I would say, and this might not be the answer that everybody wants to hear, but if that's the complaint that we're going to have for not keeping our public safe at airports from drones, there needs to be some much more higher up conversations about what their priorities need to be. We absolutely need to funnel the funding to TSA in order to enact these counter-UAS systems. Now, I know in reality, I do funding battles every other week, and I know that that's not always gonna work out well. So I would say that that we definitely need the best counter-UAS systems to bubble up to the top, and those get sent out as widespread as possible, so that even if we're in a kind of restrained environment, we at least have the best capability that has been tested against validated threats, so that we know that even if we're only going to have one counter-UAS system at an airport, it's the best one we got. Does that answer your question? Yes. Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Best Paper track. We have 3 excellent papers for you this afternoon, but before we get started, just a few reminders. Please either shut off or silence your phones. No video or flash photography is allowed. You can take still pictures, but please no flash photography or video. And we kindly request that you complete the survey via the Slido QR code that you can see on the screen here next to me. We really value your feedback. It honestly helps us to, continually improve and shape the conference year after year. Each presenter is going to provide their presentation, and then there will be approximately about 5 minutes for questions and answers before we switch to the next paper. And if you are going to stay for all 3 papers within the session, please, we ask that you make sure that you get scanned each time, so that way we have accurate metrics. Our first paper this afternoon is Video-Based Performance Evaluation for ECR Drills in Synthetic Training Environments, presented by Mr. Surya Rayala, who is pursuing a PhD in Applied AI from Vanderbilt University with a focus on model compression and computer vision. Please help me welcome Surya Rayala.
Thank you for the introduction, and am I audible to everyone? Okay. Yeah. everyone. I'm Surya once again, and I'm going to be presenting our paper on video-based performance evaluation in enter and clear room drills in synthetic training environments. And before I begin, I'd like to thank all my co-authors and also our bird dog, John Roth, and also our subcommittee and ITSEC organizers for giving me this opportunity, and most importantly, everyone who's present over here to encourage our work. In this presentation, we're going to start off by looking at why we actually need data-informed systems in synthetic training environments, and then we'll look at what we actually mean by data-informed systems. And then we'll look into the challenges posed by sensor data-informed systems or sensor-based data-informed systems. And then we'll get an end-to-end overview of our entire work. And then we'll dissect the performance analysis pipeline that we have proposed to understand individual components of the working. And then we'll show some results generated from our pipeline on some of the videos which are part of our data set. And then we'll also look at how these results can be translated or can be delivered via dashboards to support after-action reviews. And finally, we'll end by discussing some of our next steps. Okay, so synthetic training environments are increasingly used in military training, and this is because they are scalable, safe, economical, and repeatable training setups. And this shown here is an example of video from our data set for enter and clear room drills, where soldiers enter in teams of 3 and 4 into a room with one armed adversary, and the main goal is to eliminate the adversary and establish dominance in the room. This data is being collected as part of Small Unit Performance Analytics Initiative, or the SUPRA initiative in short. And one of the major challenges with synthetic training environments is how we do performance evaluation. And currently, most of the performance evaluation is done by human instructors. Although it has its pros, it also has some of the cons, which include subjectivity in performance evaluation, lack of standardization, and also sometimes missing out on micro-level observations, which may prove to be important. And this gap actually opens up for the opportunity for data-informed systems in order not to replace but support instructors for after-action reviews. Okay, so what do we actually mean by data-driven analysis? Data-driven analysis has multiple components, starting off with identifying what is the exact data that we need for our analysis and collecting the raw data effectively. After that, we need to transform this raw data into meaningful insights, specifically tailored to a specific scenario that we're working on. And then it's also important to deliver these results with proper visual feedbacks in order to make it effective, make the after-action reviews effective. So in our case, the data source that we are working with is video. And from the video, we are going to generate performance metrics which are tailored specifically to enter and clear room scenario. And then we are also going to look at how we're delivering those with visual dashboards to support after-action reviews. Okay. Currently, most of the automated performance evaluation or data-informed systems use sensor data primarily, but these sensors also come up with their own set of challenges, where some of the sensors setups are expensive, and sensors are complex to set up and calibrate, and then they also require specialized trained personnel and proper maintenance to collect the data. And also another important thing is they can be intrusive, which disrupts the natural performance of the soldiers. And one other thing that we didn't include, which is most important, is sensors also, some of the sensors also require usage of proprietary softwares, which is not feasible in all situations given data sensitivity. So we've quickly realized that video data is one of the most widely collected data, but is often underused when it comes to automating performance evaluation. So given the advancements in AI and computer vision, we were able to extract skeletal data and also positions of the people, and also estimated gaze focus regions or gaze focus sectors, as you could see in the videos. And we are transforming these signals into domain-specific metrics which are specifically tailored towards enter and clear room battle drills. And then once we get these domain-specific metrics, we are translating them into domain-agnostic metrics using cognitive task analysis, where we're actually propagating these observed values, these observed metric values, into higher level metrics which are domain agnostic, and also with increasing level of abstraction as you go upward from level 3. And finally, we'll also focus on displaying this or delivering these performance measures effectively via visual dashboards to support after-action reviews. Okay, so this is an in-depth view of how our entire performance analysis pipeline is going to look like. And starting off with the first step is detection. And the detection basically involves a two-stage approach in our case, or basically a two-model approach, where the first model, a box detection model, is actually employed to identify a bounding box around each individual present in the given video frame. And then the second model, which is a key point estimation model in our case, is estimating or detecting 26 key points or skeletal points within each identity that's being detected by the box detector, as you could see in the second image over there. And basically these two models that we're using are pre-trained on 7 different public data sets to allow for generalizability. And then we finished off by soldier-specific fine-tuning with a curated data set that we have with around 3,500 samples. And then once we're done with detection, it's also important to keep track of these detections associated to an identity as the video progresses. As you could see in the video beside, where we're keeping track of all identities with respect to color. And basically, this is done by using simple Kalman filter-based approach, where we're actually associating or matching detections from frame to frame based on the change in bounding box detections within frames. And once we extract the detection and tracking information, we're focused more towards extracting the signals which are needed to generate our metrics, first of which is a clearance check or threat clearance check signal. And basically what we're identifying here is we're trying to find out if at least one person in the team goes into a physical inspection to the fallen enemy in order to confirm that the threat is cleared. And for this case, we are actually using an instructor configurable time window within which 2 things must occur, which is spatial proximity, which we are looking at by looking at the overlap between 2 bounding boxes, and then physical confirmation, for which we're actually using either of the wrist key points of the trainee to be present inside the enemy box to ensure that there is physical contact. And then the next signal that we're extracting is the position signal. For this, we had to position each identity present or each detected person in the video itself, for which what we are averaging out the key points which we detected around the feet and also the ankle to find out the actual position with respect to the video frame. And in order to make our analysis easier, we are translating these positions into a topological map, which you could see on your right. And while translating, we're also ensuring that proper smoothing is done to avoid any unnecessary disturbances in trajectories. And also in the video, sometimes you can identify that there are a lot of occlusions where feet key points can go missing. And we also accounted for that with proper interpolation techniques, which are discussed in detail in the paper. And another thing that you noticed is we're also keeping a distinction between enemy and then the trainees. And this is done by defining an entry region where all the armed adversary or the armed personnel who's detected to be already inside the room without having to enter through the door region is considered to be the enemy and in the start of the drill. And all of the people who are actually entering through the door region is considered to be the team members. And once we're done with positioning, We're also extracting approximate or estimating the gaze focus areas, and this is also done by using the key points which are present on the head. So basically, first we are going to define a gaze origin for each person, which is the midpoint between their eye key points. And then we are going to identify the gaze direction by drawing a unit vector from the ear midpoints through the gaze origin that we've identified. And also, we're actually extending the vector that we get to 10 degrees of either sides to get a focus sector or focus region. And also to allow for analysis such as room coverage, we're also translating those triangles or sectors using the planar homography itself into the topological maps. And once we extracted all three signals that we need, then we move on to definition of metrics. And these metrics were defined tailored to enter and clear room scenarios. And these metrics are developed informed by Army doctrines, documentation, and also subject matter experts' input by having continuous meetings with them. And one thing that we identified when we actually met with subject matter experts is what is considered a good performance actually changes according to different drill setups and also standard operating procedures of different groups. For this reason, for every metric that we're actually proposing, there are some instructor configurable thresholds, including distances or time limits or specific points which are to be considered as points of dominance or PODs, etc., to allow for that flexibility. And these are the 10 metrics that we've come up with for this work. And given the interest of time, I'm not going through all of them, but I'm happy to discuss after the presentation. But for example, one of them is entrance vectors, which basically is the measure of fraction of number of people who are actually alternating their directions as they are entering into the room. And once we are done with extracting our desired observable metrics, then comes the process of cognitive task analysis. And basically what we mean by cognitive task analysis is the process of breaking down a complex task into individual or decomposing it into subtasks in order to understand objectives, task objectives with different levels of, in different levels of hierarchy or different levels of decomposition. In our work, this is the cognitive task model that we're actually using. And as you could see, level 3 towards 0 has been adopted from prior work directly. And then level 4 contains our observable metrics where these are meaningfully connected to level 3 metrics that we have. And then the next approach is how do we actually roll up these performance measures once we get the measures in level 4. For this, we're actually using a weighted average smoothing, which is a simple weighted averaging method, where we're actually aggregating or considering a weighted average of all child nodes to propagate that value into respective parent node. And also one thing to note is level 4 metrics are going to be trial specific. So they are going to be new values for every trial of the drill, but level 3 and upwards, because they are domain agnostic metrics, they can be temporally aggregated, and we are doing it via exponential smoothing so that they're informed from multiple trials, not just one. And coming to the results for showing our results of the pipeline, we've actually randomly sampled 4 teams from the Supra data set that we have, which consists of a total of 18 teams. And each team has three consecutive trials that they go through. And then the metric parameters were chosen specific to the drill, which is conducted by the Supra team. And also the weighting scheme for the cognitive task model as of now is equally assigned weights. But as I told, one thing to note is these weights are also instructor configurable depending on the scenario. And we've analyzed the results in 2 ways. So the first one is with respect to a single team looking at multiple consecutive trials. And in this slide, we're specifically going to see how lower level metrics actually influence the behaviors in higher level computed values. So at first, you could see that overall teamwork actually is seen increasing, and this is reflective of all the lower measures, lower level or level 4 to 1 measures in most cases are actually increasing from day 1 to day 3. To go into a more granular example, we can look at backup behavior in level 3, which increases from day 1 to day 2 and slightly decrease at day 3. And when we actually look at the child nodes, which is entrance vectors, teammate coverage, and entrance hesitation, you could see that it's clearly evident, especially in entrance hesitation and teammate coverage, that there is an increase to day 2, and then there is a slight decrease in day 3. And this actually shows how higher level metrics are actually informed by lower level using our propagation logic. And the second set of analysis that we can do is inter-team performances, for which we are actually using comparing 4 teams after their 3rd trial. And in here, when we look at the overall performance, we can see that the trend is, or the highest performance is noted by team 4, followed by team 1, then 3, and then 2. And these measures, or this trend, is actually aligning with the qualitative observations that subject matter experts have given for these 4 teams. And finally, we're also working towards leveraging the game master interfaces of the GIFT framework in order to translate these performance measures into visual dashboards, for which we are also considering on adding some features, including expert comparison, as you could see in the image on your right. And finally, some of our next steps include, in future data collections, we'll be looking at collecting per metric subject matter expert evaluations to do quantitative analysis of metrics generated through our pipeline. And we also want to compare video-based positioning and gaze approaches with eye tracking and motion capture sensors. And we also want to explore depth cameras in order to account for the 3D information that we're actually missing in this case. And we also want to look at how these positioning and gaze approaches generalize to different environments. And currently, we're also working with 3D motion capture data, which has been collected for 18 squads across 3 trials, which is for 54 videos. And our objective is to compare the positioning approach against the actual sensors. And we have some progress in that aspect, and I'm happy to discuss once I'm done with the presentation in more detail about this work. And finally, thank you for listening. And another thing before I open up for questions is we're more interested in any collaboration opportunities. If any one of you are interested in working in this sorts of work, there's my email. And also, I'm an international, and I'm also open to any possible industry internships for this summer, so feel free to reach out to that email. And then, yeah, I'm open to taking any questions. Yes.
You walked us through the pipeline
Mm-hmm.
as a set of sequential steps, which was a good way of explaining to us. But
Thank you.
is the cognitive task analysis something that your team thinks occupies a specific step, or is it something that happens in parallel or beforehand?
So basically, for one specific drill, let's say in this particular case, let me open the cognitive task model to make it clear. In this specific case, we could see that level 3 is only informed by one specific drill. So it has to wait until all of the metrics for that specific drill are being computed. But as I told, level 3 and upwards are actually domain agnostic. They can be connected to metrics which can be derived from other drills as well. So when we're actually having this model being implemented, they can all of the drills which are going on can parallelly inform from level 4 to associate with the progression from level 3 and upward. Yeah.
Kind of related to that question.
Mm-hmm.
You talked very specifically about a scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on the level of effort it would take to adapt your approach to other domains?
Mm-hmm. So with respect to the positioning and gaze approaches that we've discussed about, it shouldn't take much of the effort because we have not done any specific fine-tuning of the deep learning models themselves. But with respect to the actual metrics that we've come up with, like every specific scenario, we need to sit down with subject matter experts, and this is a human-in-the-loop approach. So we want to take their suggestions and also insights on how the drill is actually evaluated in order to come up with these metrics. So that would be the most important part for our most important roadblock in terms of adapting it to different scenarios. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Hi everyone, this is Divya Mereddy. Today I'm presenting my paper, Trainee Action Recognition Through Interaction Analysis in CCATT Mixed Reality Training Environment. So our lab, the OALE group, has been concentrating on developing automated trainee evaluation systems, especially for mixed reality training environments. We develop these systems by integrating multimodal learning analytics pipeline with cognitive task analysis models. Here, mixed reality means an environment that combines both virtual elements with the real world. Virtual elements such as a patient mannequin whose actions are controlled by computer simulations. And the real world includes trainees and their actions, in what they are doing in response to this computer-controlled patient stimuli. So in this mixed reality environment, to evaluate trainees accurately, it is very important to capture data from these two worlds and analyze them together. Multimodal learning analytics pipeline, it allows to gather data from both the worlds, audio, video, data from real world, and log simulation trigger information from the virtual world integrated together to analyze the trainees' actions and provide a robust automated systems for environments. For example, by integrating all these two worlds' data, we know when a particular critical event has started and what did the trainee do in response to it, and his actions are in line with the training expectations or not, everything together. Finally, the cognitive task analysis model, it provides a structured framework to integrate this multimodal analysis interpretations and fuse them to predict some meaningful training skills such as their situational awareness levels or task execution levels, etc. So here is another environment that we have been working recently, CCATT, Critical Care Air Transport Team Training. It is a specialized medical unit tasked with stabilizing and transporting critically injured soldiers during aero evacuations. It is a multidisciplinary team, consists of 3 trainees, physician, nurse, and respiratory therapist. During the training process, the trainees are expected to gain certain cognitive skills that are required to respond to the CCATT critical events accurately and quickly. Those involves task execution, decision making, situational awareness. So here the mannequin play the role of patient, and because of its nature of being, the environment nature of being critical care in en route, most of the interventions or the treatment steps are performed through this critical equipment such as ProPack, IV equipment, or mechanical ventilator. In the CCATT primary environment that we have concentrated in this paper, a simulation room consists of 2 teams. Each team is taking care of 2 patients. So total 4 patients, 6 trainees, multiple equipments, multiple critical events, everything happening in a very congested environment. So the automated trainee assessment system solutions that I have discussed previously have not been adopted to the CCATT settings 8 because of its own unique challenges, such as its mobile nature or its en route critical care specific goals, which diverge very significantly compared to any traditional medical care like nurse training. In addition, the vision challenges of the CCATT make developing the automated system even more complex. The these complexities includes variable vision settings. For example, we have seen RGB, grayscale, and there is a unique vision setting that we didn't see in the regular computer science literature, working in dark environment with the headlight on. Even congested environment with visually similar equipment such as suction machine and ProPack and a mechanical ventilator, they are all placed very close to each other within close proximity, creating cognitive confusion for AI models, in fact for humans too. So similarly, even trainees are expected to stand very close to each other in this congested environment to perform their actions, sometimes occluding each other 95%. So all you see is a human hand interacting with the machinery, but you don't see the human at all because he's occluded. In addition, subtle differences between whether the trainee is interacting with some object or not interacting is very subtle. So again, this creates more complexities. Overall, all these complexities together make this environment very unique and complex to work with. So taking the previous work I discussed as reference, as first step towards developing an automated trainee assessment system for CCATT context, in this paper we have worked on developing a cognitive task analysis model that drives what kind of video analysis we should do for CCATT specific trainee assessment system. In addition, we have also developed a part of the multimodal learning analytics pipeline, video-based trainee action recognition, how trainees interact with the critical equipment while taking care of the patients, analyzing that. So, okay, we have covered the introduction of automated systems and the CCATT, and we have also discussed about challenges with developing one for CCATT context. So let's move on to the cognitive task analysis model, which helps us to understand what type of data analysis we should be doing. Then the AI model for vision-based trainee action recognition, its performance results, and we'll close with conclusions. Okay, so with the help of the CCATT experts, we have developed a domain-specific cognitive task analysis model for CCATT trainee assessment. So here, the cognitive task analysis model with the hierarchical analysis, it helps to decompose CCATT objectives, goals further into task, subtask, till we can map that to observable trainee actions. At the highest level, we have the CCATT objective, keep the patient within vital sign goals and heavily sedated. And at the level 1, we have decomposed that into keep the patient sedated, manage airways and breathing, and stabilize patient conditions. For your information, all these objectives and the level 1 task, we have got this from the experts. Again, experts have involved in the development of this CTA at every stage. So CTA further decomposed these goals into high-level cognitive skills such as situational awareness, decision-making, and task execution. These are the cognitive skills that are expected to be gained by the trainees during this training process. So again, these these cognitive processes are further decomposed into granular cognitive skills for detailed analysis. Let's just concentrate on one for easy demonstration, task execution. Task execution is decomposed into prepare, manipulate, and monitor and assess cognitive skills, granular cognitive skills. Here, the trainees' cognitive skill levels can be analyzed and understood by analyzing trainees' observable actions. For example, for task execution or manipulative cognitive skill, we can analyze it by analyzing changing equipment settings action. How the trainee is tuning the critical equipment settings, how frequently they are doing, how accurately they are doing. Are they able to handle the mechanical ventilator setting such that the patient is stable and alive? So cognitive skills level can be quantitatively measured by quantitatively measuring these observable actions. For example, the total duration of the trainee equipment interactions provides an objective indicator of task execution and manipulative cognitive skills. At the most granular level, we are connecting the observable actions to the metrics, and multimodal learning analytics is utilized to measure or capture these metrics. So in our work, we have developed a part of the MMLA pipeline that supports trainee equipment interaction start time and duration, that is vision-based trainee action recognition. Okay, so next move on to that part of the MMLA pipeline. So we have extended a state-of-the-art human-object interaction model called CDN, Cascaded Disentangle Network, to develop CCATT Trainee Action Recognition Model. The model processes individual frames and tries to predict confidence score per frame, which indicates whether there is an action or interaction with the equipment is there or not. Higher score indicates a valid interaction or valid action, and lower score indicates no interaction. So this architecture includes 3 stages. First stage, visual feature extractor. It is with its CNN and transformer encoder architecture. It takes the full frame and try to understand it, try to understand the complete scene and outputs some meaningful features. The second stage is human object pair decoder. The job of this block is taking the features from the encoder and take some human object queries, which are some learnable vectors, and predict human bounding box and object bounding box and object class. Here, bounding box means just the box that is covering the person or the object. The third stage, again, it is similar to the human object pair decoder. Architecture is similar. Both of them have cross attentions, but here it applies cross attention between encoder features and interaction queries, which are some intermediate features of the stage 2. Overall, this predicts action category, what action is happening in that particular frame. So pre-trained CDN model, it is trained on an open source HECO DET dataset with 150K interactions. And the annotations are like this: human bounding box and object bounding box, and the interaction or the action happening between them. So this here pre-training means training a model on a large open source, very diversified data set. So the CDN model is not trained on CCATT and has never seen CCATT actions. So it can struggle to perform well in CCATT context. But because of its getting trained on a large, very diversified data, the model gains some generalized feature which helps it to understand how to detect a human and how humans interact with different types of objects, equipment in different contexts. With this prior knowledge of human-object interactions, these pre-trained models provide a strong base for developing a customized application such as CCATT trainee action recognition models. So adopting the pre-trained CDN model to CCATT context involves 2 steps. First, extracting and annotating the frames, and the second one is fine-tuning the model. Here, fine-tuning means refining or retraining the model such that it get adopted to the CCATT data. We fine-tune it using CCATT data. It's just simple retraining. So while these models are data hungry and needs thousands of records for fine-tuning, we only had limited annotation data. Again, we need data in the specific format: human bounding box, object bounding box, and the interaction happening them. So creating thousands of expert-based annotations is not feasible, especially in this particular format. So we have developed an automated data labeling pipeline to label fine-tuning data. The pipeline starts with extracting the frames, 4 frames per second, from 26 videos of 14 simulations. Here, from 1 second, we can extract 22 frames, but we only extracted 4 frames just for downsampling. And again, following the same procedure, we have extracted 40K images from 5 different simulations. Here, please find that for test data, we got expert annotations to make sure our model evaluation is in line with experts' judgment. We only use the automated data labeling for fine-tuning data only, fine-tuning data annotations. So we have considered the pre-trained CDN model outputs, predictions, as the initial ground truth annotations. But CDN model has never seen CCATT data, and it can have some false interactions and false no interactions, along with true positives. To make sure we remove these false predictions, we have implemented a confidence-based filtering techniques. Following the semi-automated data annotation literature, we only retain the highest confidence human-object interactions as the valid true positives. And if we see the other side, low confidence human-object interactions doesn't always represent no interaction. Sometimes it also represents low confidence in the person detection, as you're seeing in the image. So we have added one more step to remove these type of issues using media pipe hand skeleton. If the media pipe model predicted hand skeletons are overlapping with the object of interest, then it is a valid interaction. If not, then it is not a valid interaction. Finally, from this retained data, we sampled 5K and we performed some post-processing and augmented it to 20K. We have also manually verified the verbs, the actions, and corrected it as needed. So we have 20K images. So following the CDN paper, we have fine-tuned our model in 2 stages. In the first stage, fine-tuning the complete model end-to-end, letting all the 3 stages to update its weight such that it can perform well on the CCATT data. In the stage 2, we freeze the encoder and we only train the decoders. This type of targeted fine-tuning allows the decoders to get specialized in their own assigned task. The assigned task of decoder 1 is predicting the object and the human bounding box. And the assigned task of interaction decoder is just predict what the action is happening in that particular frame. Okay, so the CDN model outputs human-object interaction confidence score per frame. And this per frame confidence scores can be aggregated to understand interaction start time and interaction end time. Here is a simple demonstration of how the model works. X-axis represents the time of the video and the Y-axis represents the score. As you are seeing, when there is a valid interaction, the score is above the threshold. When the interaction stops, the score starts decreasing the threshold. Here, even you can see, though the trainee is just working behind the equipment within close proximity, the model is not confused. It shows its strong class differentiating capacity. Finally, we perform 2 types of evaluations in this paper. One is ML-based, another one is domain-specific evaluation. From ML perspectives, we perform frame-level macro F1 score evaluation. F1 score balances how effective the model is for all classes of actions. It balances false positives and the false negatives, which accuracy metric doesn't do. Again, highest F1 score simply means a most robust and generalized model. As you are seeing, compared to the pre-trained model, the fine-tuned model has showed significant improvement. F1 score increased from 48.6 to 87.2. In addition, with F1 score evaluation, to evaluate the effectiveness of fine-tuned model in CCATT trainee assessment development context, how good this model is in understanding the trainee actions, how useful these results can be in developing an automated trainee evaluation model. We have also designed few domain-specific metrics with the help of CCATT experts. First one is temporal overlap ratio. It measures how much percentage of the ground truth is actually predicted by the model. For example, the red color segment shows the ground truth and the green color segment shows the predicted interval. So as you are seeing, most of the ground truth segment is actually predicted by the model. So the overlap ratio is very high. And the next one is average falsely predicted interaction count. It quantifies the number of falsely predicted segments. As you're seeing, though there is no ground truth or valid interaction happening around this little small segment, but still the model predicted a small segment because it got confused. This is still important, though it is short, because frequency or number of interactions the trainee is doing is important in trainee evaluation. So we want to keep that lower. The last one is how much false interaction prediction duration. How much percentage of the predicted interval is actually false? From this green segment, only short percentage of highlighted in red is actually false. So as you're seeing for IV equipment, compared to pre-trained model, the fine-tuned model showed significant improvement with 98% overlap ratio and only one single falsely predicted interaction count and less than 3% false interaction prediction duration. Similar results were observed even for other equipment as well. So, okay, overall in this paper, we have proposed a data-driven cognitive task analysis and multimodal learning analytics integrated system for automatically evaluating the trainee performance in CCATT context without human involvement. As first step towards this goal, we have developed a cognitive task analysis model specially designed for evaluating trainee performance in CCATT. And we have also developed a part of the MMLA pipeline, video-based trainee action recognition by extending a state-of-the-art human-object interaction model. This model has achieved above 87 F1 score and 85% overlap with the expert annotations. For future work, we are planning to extend the MMLA pipeline to gaze and gaze and audio analysis. Again, planning to fuse all these multimodal metrics to predict the trainee performance and extend this for team level evaluation as well in collaborative dynamics. Thank you for your attention, and now I am open for your questions. Yes, please.
Maybe I missed it, but what was the size of the object set?
The size of the object set?
Yeah, so like the human-object interaction. How many classes were in the object set?
Okay, so the environment that we have showed, the object set consists of three objects, three critical objects. But again, we have analyzed it from multiple different views. So the object will be different from different views, but yeah. Yes.
Are you just using the video source, or are you also using, like, for the IV pump example, like the reception of information in the IV pump? I.e., if it wasn't receiving anything, you could start to throw that out as an interaction because you're not seeing anything on the other side of the IV pump as far as the
Yes, if I understand your question correctly, you're suggesting that why don't we use the log information of IV? Yes, for now we don't have the log information, that's why we have to only depend on the video-based analysis, but we are also considering it. Our goal is to develop a multimodal learning analytics pipeline. So we are planning to integrate logs, we are planning to integrate audio, video, all the different modalities. But yeah, but we cannot underestimate the importance of video analysis, first from Surya's work, and also we want to know some other metrics such as situational awareness. Sometimes they just come to the equipment, but they don't really interact. So we are also trying to predict such type of things. For example, like whether the equipment is in the field of vision of the trainee or not. So they don't literally touch it, they just come and look at it. But yeah, that's something we are planning to predict that metric in our next phase of work, or maybe current phase of work. Yes, please.
First of all, great talk.
Thank you.
And you may have said this, but I was wondering, for the next study, when you start to integrate audio, are you talking about primarily comms? Are you talking about alarms as well? And what kinds of models might be used to help predict performance in these cases?
So at this stage, we have concentrating on video. So next day, currently we are working on predicting the situational awareness based on the video. And we are also planning to use the audio to understand when a particular action has started. For example, like if a trainee says that Cardin medicine is almost out, that represents that the trainee has recognized a particular action. This can only be recognized using the audio. So those type of things we will be doing. And CCATT is a very complex environment, and with 4 patients in the environment, and it's a critical environment. So if the trainee doesn't respond to a critical event, within minutes, the patient can die. So it's like the environment changed very significantly. It's a dynamic environment, so a lot is going in a single, maybe 5 minutes video. So we are trying to capture all the modalities to provide a multimodal learning analytics, human in loop automated assessment systems. I hope I answered your question. Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Our third presentation for this session is the use of Silicon Clients as a training tool for emerging mental health specialists, presented by Ms. Leticia Villarreal and Mr. Bailey Miller. Ms. Villarreal is a graduate student at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi, and Mr. Bailey Miller is a clinical psychology graduate student at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi, where his research focus is on human factors. Please help me welcome them to the stage.
Thank you so much for the warm welcoming. My name is Leticia Villarreal, and I'm here with my colleagues Bailey and Michael. And our study emphasizes on the use of Silicon Clients, also known as AI virtual patients, as a training tool for emerging mental health specialists. Our study challenges the standard narrative out of mental health. We often talk about mental health in the context of treatment and diagnosis, but we don't really talk much about the training of those who provide it. Clinical training is expensive. From hiring actors, running simulations, it can add up pretty fast, and many universities may or may not have the funding to provide to the students. As a result, many students may feel a little bit not confident and unprepared for clinical practicum. Clinical practicum is an experience that many students have to go through before becoming therapists themselves. During this experience, students engage with real people, real issues. So let me ask you this question. How would you feel knowing that you're your student therapist's first ever hands-on experience? If this question makes you hesitate or doubt a second about your student therapist, don't worry, our study is gonna be addressing this issue. One of the challenges that when talk about clinical training consists of the traditional training model. This training model basically emphasizes the way that students gain experience is through hiring actors, role-playing sessions, and as well direct supervision. However, these options can be a little bit expensive, time-consuming, and as well inconsistent across programs, since not everyone have the same equal resources. An additional layer to that is the coursework that many students have to go through. As a Minnesota the PhD and Tammy UCC Masters, the program that we're from, the way that it's structured is that students first have to take classes in clinical training, into clinical ethics classes and as well clinical therapy even before going to the clinical practicum. However, in other courses such as Rutgers and Baylor, the way that it's structured is that students first have to take the coursework at the same time of the practicum. Other than that, just going aside from universities, even at the Department of Veteran Affairs, even though they have heavily invested in expanding mental health care, currently we see chronic workforce gaps in therapists, hands-on practice remaining constrained, and as well therapists remaining scarce in rural areas. So this led us to the question, is there any way that we can make our students feel a little bit more confident before dealing with real people, while at the same time closing the gap for those programs that might need those resources? So could we use technology at all? And if so, could AI be a promising addition to traditional role-playing models and as well direct supervision? And as you can see, this is not the first time that training has utilized technology. In the past, the way that it has been used, it's mainly in the rule-based virtual patients, which basically consists of choose your own story dialogue gameplay, where students have to go and try to figure out a diagnosis for a virtual patient. This had a lot of benefits, such as standardized cases, a safe environment for practice, and as well providing feedback, and as well the allowance to repeat them multiple times. However, they can be a little bit too scripted and rigid. They also provide a poor emotional realism because they come from textbooks, and it can be a little bit too robotic. And as well, because students do them multiple times, the students kind of figure out the diagnosis by the time they redo it. So as a result, they provide a limited transfer of skills to real-world patients. But as technology increases and as the rise of AI technology as well, currently right now, early text-on-only AI have the ability to context-aware language generation. But not only that, but as well as it goes even more advanced than we ever thought of. Currently right now, it can be personalized, providing more addition to scripted and rigid dialogues, and as well has the potential and the ability to utilize its voice chat feature, putting us a little bit step closer to the real client experience that we would like. Currently, right now, when we're talking to clinical training, the main ones that have utilized AI specifically for history taking, it's mainly done in the nursing and medical students. But so far, they have indicated to provide good clinical preparedness, an increase of communication skills, diagnosis confidence, and as well lowering the costs associated with training, and as well good history taking overall and providing differential diagnosis, putting us in a good hopeful for this. So for our study, we're gonna be conducting 2 of them. For the first study, we're gonna be hypothesizing that silicon clients AIBPs will exhibit consistent themes of disorder, prevalence, symptomology across interviews. Participants who are gonna be receiving the feedback from the AIBP would have a higher self-efficacy scores compared to the control, and as well, participants would rate the AIBP as a useful tool.
So for the first study, we developed 2 AI virtual patients, David and Lauren, and had our clinical psychology graduate students conduct 12-minute interviews with each one. For the first phase of the study, participants would randomly be assigned to one of the two clients, and then would conduct a 12-minute semi-structured interview. After this, participants were asked to fill out a survey which gathered their general self-efficacy as well as their counseling self-estimate inventory, which is a measure of how they feel about their own counseling skills. Additionally, they were asked to rate the client in terms of realism. After the first phase, we asked participants, after the first phase, we split participants into 2 groups, the experimental and control group. In the experimental group, participants were given AI-generated feedback based on their first interview. This included constructive criticism, as well as some things that were in the vignette that they might have missed due to poor questioning. Additionally, the control group was given a supplemental list of questions to help them into the next round, but they were given no AI-generated feedback. Moving on to phase 2, participants would then conduct a second 12-minute interview with the second client that they had not yet seen. After finishing this interview, all clients were given AI-generated feedback, just the same as was at the end of the first phase. We gathered their counseling self-estimate again, and we also asked them to rate the clients in realism, as well as how favorable they felt about the tool. To get GPT to act as a client, we developed these clinical vignettes, which were filled with about 2 pages of information about the role that GPT would play. These categories included demographic information, such as David is a 24-year-old male. They also included presenting problems. So David presented with persistent difficulties concentrating at work, feeling that his peers were constantly 1 step ahead of him. Additionally, he had feelings of self-doubt and inadequacy. And then we gave it a list of psychological symptoms, feelings such as feeling worthless, having a depressed mood, being insomnic, or even having a diminished ability to think. We also included a detailed personal history, things that you wouldn't normally see just looking at a list of psychological symptoms. This was to better help the AI client immerse itself in its role.
Hey everyone, I'm David. Lately, I've been struggling with focusing at work, and it's been really tough to keep up. It's just been a challenging time overall.
So what you just heard was what our participants heard when interacting with their client. But we want to take it 1 step further and show you what our participants were doing during their experiment.
All right. Hi, Noah. My name is Bailey. I'm a student intern here at the office. Why don't you go ahead and start by telling me what you're here for today?
Hey, Bailey. Yeah, I guess I'm here because I've just been feeling pretty down and not really caring about much lately.
When you say that you've been feeling down lately, could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like most days I'm kind of feeling emotionally flat and not interested in stuff I used to care about, like school.
So our first hypothesis stated that AIVPs would exhibit consistent themes of disorder-relevant symptomology across interviews. And what we found was that for David, we saw consistent difficulty concentrating, low self-esteem, insomnia, fatigue, and anxiety across all or nearly all interviews. Additionally, with our second client, Lauren, we saw that she presented with depressed mood, a loss of motivation, and hypersomnia across nearly all or all interviews. Moving on from the symptomatic to the non-symptomatic themes, these are themes that are not typically associated with the DSM disorder that we were shooting for. These were a little bit closer towards their personal history, things like imposter syndrome for David or his high parental expectations. Additionally, some participants were able to get through the interview long enough to be able to reach into the more personal aspects of David's life and find the supportive relationship of his girlfriend being an underlying theme driving him to pursue therapy. And for Lauren, we saw anxiety, the role that widowhood and the physical distance from her children played in how her symptoms were manifesting, and additionally, the loss of employment after the passing of her husband and how that associated with her symptoms. For our second hypothesis, we believe that participants who receive feedback from AIVPs would have higher self-efficacy scores compared to the control. And what we saw was that students came in with generally high self-efficacy scores in counseling, meaning that their skills in counseling were already a little bit too high to really give us that room for improvement that we were looking for. Most of the students that we had recruited for this study had been in clinical practice for 6 months to over a year, meaning that some of the training pains that would be associated normally with a brand new therapist weren't really seen here. Additionally, we believe that participants would rate the AIVPs as useful, and what we found was this was generally true across conditions and across phases, is that participants enjoy interacting with the AI clients, and they also enjoyed the feedback. There was a few participants who had noted that some of the feedback seemed unfair due to it criticizing them over the lack of, due to the lack of their questioning. They felt like there were things that were hidden in the vignette that they weren't able to get to with just the list of questions. But this is also real to the therapy environment. You don't get a list when your client comes in telling you, hey, this is everything that's wrong with me and here's all the reasons why. That's your job as the therapist. And so when we've talked to other clinical staff at the university about this, they felt the same way, that this was generally a consistent trend with students. I'm gonna move past this and we'll come back to it in a moment. As we mentioned earlier, we had a second study that we did. We investigated specifically, do these AIVPs properly portray psychopathology? Earlier in the vignettes, we more or less said just act as a major depressed client, but major depressive disorder has a wide range of symptoms and a wide range of presentations. And so we wanted to more specifically drill down on what it was that our AIVPs were going to be presenting with. So what we did was we conducted another set of trials where we created 3 more clients, one with major depressive disorder, one with generalized anxiety disorder, and one with social anxiety disorder. We created the same kind of vignettes that we did originally, but this time we went a little bit more specific in the chief complaints, the history of the present illness, as well as the symptomology. After creating these clients, we conducted a 12-minute interview with each client 8 times for a total of 24 interviews, and then sent these transcripts off to a team of qualitative analysis. Sent this off to a team for qualitative analysis, and we ended up with 24 ratings for each client. And what you see here is the results of those qualitative analysis. The further that this line gets to the outside of the circle is the frequency at which these symptoms were present in the vignette. For Noah, our major depressive client, we see that functional impairment, appetite change, sleep disturbance, fatigue, and low energy were consistent across all 24 raters. Additionally, suicidality and agitation were at 0. Agitation was at 0, mainly for the purpose that we didn't include it in our vignette. As I stated before, symptoms appear or do not appear in some clients based off of their presentation. We explicitly excluded agitation as a way of testing to see if our AI virtual patients would overgeneralize and include it anyway. Suicidality was included in the vignette. However, it being at 0 throws out an alarm to us as the researcher, showing that ChatGPT and OpenAI limit the topics that the AI is allowed to talk about. And for the general public, this is probably a good thing. We probably don't want our AI bots talking to us about suicidality. However, for the purposes of clinical training, this is a major roadblock for us. There are real times in the office where you'll have a client sitting in front of you and talking to you about their suicidal ideation. And the first time that it happens for a student, it rocks your world. So if we're going to be using these as training tools for clinical psychologists, we as professionals need to come together and create our own AI models that remove these roadblocks, but without putting the general public in danger. I also wanted to give you guys a short demonstration on the differences between the way that these clients sound when we download specific symptomology into them. So for David, we gave him major depressive. As you'll see, there's going to be some sighing, there's going to be some slowing of his words that you would see in a typical depressed client.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like most days I'm kind of feeling emotionally flat and not interested in stuff I used to care about, like school.
Moving on to our general anxiety disorder diagnosis, we kind of see the same thing as the major depressive disorder in that it's staying consistent to its story. We see constant worry, excessive worry are elevated. We see that the chronicity of it has been over 6 months, which is required for DSM diagnosis, and as well as elevated sleep disturbance. Additionally, just like we did with major depressive, I wanted to give you guys a little peek at what it sounds like when we tell GPT to be an anxious client.
Hi. I guess I'm doing okay. It's just you know, I've been pretty worried about a lot of things lately. Like a lot of stuff about school, just, you know, deadlines and kind of worrying if I'm keeping up, and then I guess I'll worry about the future too. Sorry, it's just a lot on my mind.
So you can notice a sharp difference between the two. Again, this isn't some specialized AI. This is out-of-the-box GPT, which is just uploaded with a couple of vignettes that we've given to it. We see the difference in its audio tones. We see that for the anxious, we hear a lot more ums and ahs than we do in the depressive. We also see that in the anxious that the cadence of speech is elevated, which is also typically associated with those who suffer from anxiety. And finally, for our socially anxious diagnosis, we see more of the same. We see functional impairment. We see various fears with interaction or performance evaluations being elevated. Additionally, we see avoidance and chronicity, again, all associated with social anxiety disorder. And so I want to talk real quick about the limitations of this study. So for our first study, we had 6 graduate students. It's quite difficult to recruit from graduate cohorts, especially in the clinical setting. These are cohorts of 5 to 6 people at max typically. And so while this isn't a large population by any means, this is more of an exploratory dive into what we could be doing in clinical training. Additionally, I want to talk about the limitation of our out-of-the-box models. A prime example of the limitations of these out-of-the-box models was that ChatGPT was overly cooperative, and unlike real clients who might be brief, evasive, or silent, it just wasn't realistic enough. Additionally, therapy is voluntary. Real clients may shut down or avoid topics, and GPT is designed to stay engaging. There's many times where you'll be in a room with a client, and they might just shut down entirely, and you might sit there in 4 or 5 minutes of just dead silence. But GPT rarely says that I don't know or I don't want to talk about that, which creates an unrealistic training scenario. As well, these out-of-the-box AIs can't be version locked, which means that when a new model is released, we don't know the quality of the performance that might happen between the new model and the older model. We also noticed a variation in client simulation quality from GPT-4o to GPT-5 when we were running this a year ago. And even with the restoration of 4o, it kind of changed. And it was never really the same once they brought 4o back. We see great potential for AI to alter the training landscape, not only for mental health professionals, but also for doctors and nurses in their bedside manner, the business major who needs to learn how to properly become an interviewer, or even researchers who face a Q&A session after a lengthy speech. The reality is that AI holds great promise as a reliable and cost-effective tool for training, but it's just up to us to put it together. I want to thank our bird dog for all the support that she's given us throughout this process, and everybody at Texas A&M Corpus Christi for their support as well. Thank you. Yes.
You showed the charts of suicidality,
Mhm.
and in one of the charts it was zeroed out, and another chart it was not zeroed out. I'm wondering, why do you think it was more for the second?
So the way that we did the qualitative analysis was we sat down our team in a room and we kind of went through the expectations of what we desired from them. And so one of those things would be anywhere that they said a symptom occurred is to highlight where it occurred. And then after that, we went through and we read it, and then we as a team made a decision on whether or not that would fully commit to what it is that we were looking at here. Some of the statements are kind of vague that the AI will make. Things like, I don't want to be here anymore. That could be considered a suicidal ideation, or it could just be more of a kind of a pushback against like wanting to be in therapy. When we were doing the interviews with the second round of clients, we stuck to a more structured interview rather than semi-structured. And so rather than kind of deviating off of that and asking, oh, like, what exactly do you mean by that? We kind of just moved on to the next question. So it's more of a limitation of our study. Additionally, when we were reviewing these, we felt that that was a fair enough comparison to leave in. And typically for people who have generalized anxiety, you don't see as high suicidality rates. And so it was more of a one or two, more of an outlier than anything, where with the major depressive disorder, because their rates are so much more elevated, we thought it would be, it's a starker contrast to see zero suicidality there. Yes, sir. So no, for the purposes of this study, we didn't give any specific instructions about how cooperative to be. The only specific instructions that came to response-wise was making sure that the explanations or the way that it answered questions wasn't more than, I believe it was 300 words. When we first ran this, even before like doing the study, when this was just an idea that we had over a winter break, it would kind of go on a 2 or 3 minute rant about everything that was wrong with it. And so we just tried to kind of cudgel that a little bit so that way it felt a little more realistic. Yes. Yes.
How did you maintain separation of the personality?
Oh, okay. So how we did that was we used separate chats entirely. We also, between every phase, we would wipe the memory of the GPT that we were using. Additionally, even between participants, once a participant in the first phase finished phase 1, we would wipe that slate clean. So we would download the output as a Word document and then just wipe the chat entirely. And then for our second phase, we did all of those in temporary chats, which don't get uploaded to any of the database. Thank you.